Hello, people of grace. Today, for our Pastoral Connect, I want to talk about idols, anger, and your heart and my heart. We are winding down John's first letter, and in the end of that letter, John says in 1 John chapter 5, verse 19, that the whole world lies in the power of the evil one, the power of Satan, but that the Son of God has given us understanding. And I'll talk more about that understanding in the Sunday sermon following this Pastoral Connect. But then John winds down his letter with this very fatherly, very affectionate, but very essential piece of advice. He says in 1 John 5:21, "My dear children, keep yourself from idols. Guard yourself. Protect yourself from idols." Well, there's both an obvious lesson from that, which is don't worship idols. That's a great threat to our soul. But then there's another way that we need to protect ourselves from idols, because ultimately an idol is something that comes between us and God, and that we start to give more attention to than we should give to God. And so we can do that by actually worshiping an idol. We can also do that by being so angered by some wicked thing, some injustice, some idol, some devilish thing that we are convinced is keeping humanity from experiencing the love of God and the appropriate love for each other that we should have. And we can become so angry by that we're really more focused on the idol in an iconoclastic way. We're so determined to uproot and destroy that evil thing that we lose our positive, proper focus on God. See, both idolatry and excessive, angry iconoclasm, the destruction of idolatry, can take us away from God. And we can see that by looking not so much at what John writes directly in 1 John, but by looking at the journey of another great saint, another apostle, the Apostle Paul. When Paul was a young man, and he was convinced that he really understood God, he was the destroyer of idolatry. He was convinced that the Christians were worshiping a false belief system, that in the end they were idolatrous. And he rejected his mentor Gamaliel's advice and ran out and hunted down the Christians and was so determined to destroy it. But Paul wasn't righteous. He was self-righteous, and his anger was not constructive, it was destructive. That's a very simple way to evaluate your anger. Is it motivating you to take constructive action or destructive action? And Paul was destroying people, but was convinced that he was doing the right thing. Well, he got knocked off his high horse. He got blinded. He got humbled. He ultimately had to go to one of the very people that he thought was the greatest threat and idolatrous, a Christian named Ananias, to be healed. I love how Jesus does those kinds of things. But Paul's still Paul, and idols are still bad, and injustices and wicked things are still evil. And so years later, as Paul has grown into his apostleship, he visits Athens, and he sees a ton of idols. And it says in Acts 17, the whole story is in verses 16 through 31, that Paul was angered in his spirit. He was provoked in his spirit. But he's a different man. He's a healthier man. And he doesn't go on some destructive crusade or angry crusade, despite the passion he feels in his heart. There's nothing automatically wrong with that passion. God is angered, or his passions are arisen by idolatry. But then Paul becomes a student, and he humbles himself, and he becomes teachable, and he studies the idols, and he walks through the city. And then he ultimately uses an idol to reach idolaters and show them God's heart. And you can read that story in Acts 17, verse 16 through 31. But my big point here is that Paul encountered God's heart. Nobody's passions are more wounded and hurt, and then the secondary emotion to woundedness, injustice, or hurt is anger. Nobody experiences those things more righteously than God. You can summarize the human story by saying that we did not value our Creator enough to pursue Him and turned to created things, thus making those created things idols. So what did God do about it? He didn't launch, thunderbolts from heaven to take out earth. He didn't pull the sons of thunder, John and James, saying, call down fire from heaven. Occasionally, God had to do things like that to deal with very extreme cases, but his heart was, you have hurt me by turning from me to worship created things. That's not going to end well for you. That doesn't end well for me. What did God do about it? He became a created thing. So think about that and what a constructive, positive action God took by becoming Jesus to reach people who were worshiping a created thing by becoming a created thing. That's a beautiful heart and a beautiful story. And you can see Paul's heart shift into a more Christ-like awareness. And we need to experience that same shift today if we want to represent Christ well. We don't want to get so caught up in destroying that idol that's keeping us or others from God and righteousness and love, that in our righteous iconoclasm, we end up distracted. Just like the idol worshiper himself is distracted. That's not helping anybody. That's not God's heart. Let's pursue the heart of Jesus. It's always worth the effort. Then we learn how to love God, love people, and serve them both. Have a blessed day.